and I was doing a 9/11 video on my YouTube, and I knew about the dancing Israelis conspiracy theory that is very much a real set of documents. And I knew that I'm not allowed to talk about Israel for some reason, and I didn't really know why. And then literally the next day, and I'm not saying that October 7th was a good thing, but I'm saying that literally the next day, the entire internet was ablaze about Israel and Palestine, and everyone was talking about it. Wow. And it was the weirdest coincidence. And suddenly it was like, oh, all right, let's dig this thing open. Because unfortunately, I think that the state of the Israeli influence that sustained them for so long, that was essential to them surviving this long, I think that it has grown cancerous to the Jewish faith in general, because Jeffrey Epstein is the perfect example of this. Jeffrey Epstein was the world's most prolific and evil sex trafficker that we know of so far, ever. And he very clearly was a Jewish organization of Jewish people working on behalf of Israel and other groups. And so that's a dark stain on Israel and on the Jewish people if you own it. Like, if you try to defend that, that's not good. You don't want to have to defend that.
Right.
You want to be free of that kind of shit, because the Jewish people don't believe in that. That's not what Jews are. Jews are regular people.
It's the deep state of the intelligence agencies in Israel.
And the thing about Israel is that Jewish people have every incentive to need to defend Israel, right?
Right.
Because if I'm a Jew, it's like, of course you have to defend Israel. Like, that's very understandable. It's your people, and you don't want another Holocaust. Like, you don't want another, Jews have been in conflict with other people for ages because they are outsiders and because they are so different and because they group up, and lots of reasons. But you don't, as a Jewish person, you're now faced with this choice. Do I stand by Israel always, forever, for everything, and defend everything they do? Or do I get labeled as a self-hating Jew, like Dave Smith gets labeled, like Glenn Greenwald gets labeled?
Right.
Do I stand against all of my culture? And do I get ostracized by my family and by my community? But the problem is that if you have to defend everything that Israel does, you're forced to defend this deep state that is in bed with these organized crime figures.
Right.
And I would argue that Israeli deep state is just as much in bed with all the other organized crime as our deep state is, as the Saudi deep state is.
Right.
Like, there's evil people at the top of all these governments.
Well, the thing is, Israel is connected to one race of people.
Yeah.
It's correct. Whereas the United States, which also is involved in a lot of really tough things all over the world, when people think about the United States, they don't think about it as one.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Yep. And so it just puts us all in this impossible situation. And it's an impossible conversation that we all, and I'm glad for it, because it's a maturing process. And I think we need to do it very delicately and very carefully and thoughtfully, because Jewish people are people and they're not evil. But there are evil Jewish people, and there are evil American people, and there are evil Saudi people. And it's just, that's the way it is.
Well said.
Right?
Well said.
And so I welcome the conversation, but unfortunately, the thing for me, fortunately, is when I first researched it, I came across this documentary on Rumble called The Occupation of the American Mind, which is a very well put together documentary that is mostly Jewish people speaking about the history of Israel and about how they realized in the 80s when there was this specific operation where they wound up bombing this refugee camp called Sabra and Shatila. Or a refugee camp in a place called Sabra and Shatila. And there was other bombing, like atrocities. It was I guess it was a massacre, it wasn't a bombing. And it was the first time where Western journalists had taken video cameras over there, and video feed were coming back of the conflict of what was happening. And American sentiment turned really harshly against Israel in the 80s there. And they realized, we don't need to win just the kinetic war. We need to win the ideological war on the global scale. Because if we don't win that ideological war, the whole world will turn against us and call us a colonial project, which I would argue they kind of are, but that's not the point here. And I don't mean to say I'm necessarily right about my perspective on that. But that's when they switched to a propaganda war, and they started targeting the United States with propaganda. Mm-hmm. And they hired the world's top propagandists to teach Israelis and Israeli military officials and government officials how to communicate with the West and how to propagandize the West so that we would remain in the dark a little bit. That's why we have this veil and this anti-Semitism thing and this it's why you're not allowed to talk about it, because it evolved over time. And they eventually hired this guy that I think is called Howard Luntz. And Luntz worked with the Israel Project. There's a report online that came out in 2009, I think, called the Israel Language Dictionary, the Israel American Language Dictionary. And it's basically a word for word. This is how you discuss the rockets raining down. This is how you discuss the settlements. This is how you discuss the occupation and the palace and all these things. And they use examples of words that work and words that don't work. And when you read it, you realize like, holy, that's exactly what politicians have been saying on TV my entire life. And they use Obama as one example of really good words that work. You should talk like Obama because he's good at sort of empathizing with the other side and making us understand that like we're here for peace and they're the terrorists. And I say that to mean that we live inside this propagandized space because it's been essential to them for so long to protect that image in order to continue the deep state element of what they're doing. When I would argue that we would all be much better off if Bibi was not there and we had a more sane person in charge of Israel that was actually there for peace and not there for whatever the Bibi is doing. Well, and we could start to heal this thing and talk about it. And
most people in the general public aren't even aware that the Israeli people were protesting against Netanyahu before October 6th.
Yeah, he's about to get kicked out.
Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, and that it had been going on for a long time.
100%.
Yeah.
I suspect, I'm hoping I'm not blowing the lid on Trump's idea here. I kind of suspect that Trump is kind of in on a coup against Netanyahu right now. This is just my theory based upon the way he talked about like occupying Gaza and the way he's friends with Jared Kushner and the way he's friends with the Adelsons. I suspect that these powerful Jews, like the Adelson type people, are starting to realize that Netanyahu is kind of sinking this ship and he's kind of it all up and it's not going well for Israel in the public conversation. Like I can ratio just about anyone I want on Twitter over the Israel thing because the public sentiment is just shifting. And it's not healthy for anyone, for Jewish people or anyone else. And I'd suspect that the powerful Jewish people are starting to see that and are starting to scheme on how do we get Netanyahu out of there and put someone in that can actually move us towards some sort of peace. Because without a genuine desire for, like, Netanyahu is on camera saying that they have propped up Hamas in the Gaza Strip because they don't want a real government in the Gaza Strip, because it's far better for them to run this occupation and to eventually take the land if Hamas is, that's not an exact quote. Everyone should look that up for themselves.
But not just propped up, but funded.
Exactly. Yeah. And intentionally kept there.
Just when you hear that, you're like, well, what's the logic for funding Hamas? What logic?
Well, it's the exact same logic as us funding the Taliban.
Yeah.
It's the exact same logic.
Did you
it's
see
the exact
that?
same strategies.
Did you see that? Oh, God, I wish I would remember where it was happening, where someone had to say, are we really sending the Taliban $40 million a week?
Yeah.
We were.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Stay till the end, because we've got some fascinating insights that will make you see him in a whole new light. Let's get started. Ian Carroll might not be a household name like Elon Musk or Alex Jones, but he's a man of many talents. From his entrepreneurial journey to his love for science fiction and deep